So hello, everyone. My name is Thomas Kwiatkowski. I'm a business process improvement consultant at Elire with 5 years of experience implementing enterprise systems in the government and private sectors. In each implementation that I've been involved in, I've taken on a training lead role for the organizational change management, or the OCM team. And as the title of this webinar implies, I'd like to talk today about some common obstacles I've run into and how I've overcome them during these IT transformations. So I'm going to start today with a little background on Elire and then move into some training specific background. I'll discuss different factors and challenges in training and end with an example of a remote tool that I use when developing remote trainings. So a little about Elire. Our mission is to be a trusted advisor. We were founded in 2005, and we help our clients by partnering with our clients during implementations, integrations, and upgrades. We provide strategic guidance to help our clients make the most of their business processes and software investments. And at our core, we connect people, processes, and technology to deliver solutions. And within Elire, I work for the Management Advisory Services Center of Excellence. So that's our Center of Excellence that focuses on improvement of business processes. And we do this in a multitude of ways, including our application road mapping and optimization, service offering, business process improvement, AP automation, project management, testing, and through organizational change management and training. So specifically, our organizational change management framework ensures that an organization going through a large transformation they do so successfully and without many hiccups. And we do this by establishing a change strategy and by engaging stakeholders, planning for and executing communication effectively, laying out the impact of the change, and training for that change. So we use our change management methodology to ensure that the IT transformations go smoothly, because when you're upgrading an entire IT system, your organization is putting a lot of time, money, and effort into the project, and you want it to go as smoothly as possible. And that's where we at Elire come in. My experience focuses primarily on OCM and each of these 5 elements that compromise the framework that you can see here on this graphic. So you'll notice that these different elements are in a circle rather than a linear line, and that's because they all interact with each other in order to make to manage change. There's the change strategy, which guides all of the activities, and the strategy clearly outlines how each of the activities are going to be executed. So when the time comes, you can focus on the execution rather than planning for that execution. And this strategy encompasses all other elements of OCM, including stakeholder engagement. So obviously, we want stakeholders to be engaged with the project and to get their input on the change that is occurring, because it's those leaders and those sponsors that are at the steering wheel really driving the actual project. So it's ideal to get input on how to communicate within the organization, how to conduct training, and how big a change will feel to the people on the ground floor. And this is insight that stakeholders who are engaged can really provide insight to. In line with that, there is the communications element of change, and this is such a key part of OCM. At Elire, we push to create a robust communication strategy up front to clearly outline each of the major communications that will be sent throughout the project. And we put this together in the form of a matrix. And it includes things like training invitations, training reminders, go live notifications, and basically all other major communications for the project. We also conduct change impact analysis and business readiness analysis. And this element of our framework is important because it's especially important for training, because it's important to know which business processes are going to have huge changes and impacts on the end users so that your training can reflect those large changes and you can put more effort into the business processes that are getting major overhauls. And lastly, we have the training element of our OCM framework, and this is probably why you're here attending the webinar. Training is a key part of any change because it's how the end users learn to work in the new system. Training needs proper planning, and there's a certain level of academic theory that should be understood to aid with the planning and preparation of the training plan. Adult learning is complex and it's different for each individual, so you need to address training at different moments of a learner's needs, and you need to train using different modalities, all the while balancing obstacles like trainee availability, motivation, or buy-in, and logistics. And this is all stuff that I'll get into further on in the presentation, but this graphic here sums up our OCM service offering that we provide within the Management Advisory Services Center at Elire. And let's jump into the training element specifically. So, like I said, it's important to have some background information on training because this will guide your approach to training for the implementation. So, training should, at its core, help trainees acquire the knowledge and skills to perform that in the capacity that is expected to them on the job. So historically, during implementations, this is accomplished by a trainer getting in front of a classroom full of students and showing them how to do their jobs in the new system. There has been some remote or self-guided learning in the past, but it wasn't as prevalent as it's become today since the pandemic. That being said, there's still a strong desire for face-to-face learning because organizations, they ran into issues when they started doing remote learning. Trainers were used to explaining material and responding to questions in real time in a classroom setting, but some remote methods like self-guided e-learnings require the trainer or the instructional designer to rely heavily on their written documentation to convey everything that needs to be explained, and that's difficult. So regardless, here are some key principles that I followed whenever I plan for and develop training with my clients. The first thing I do is conduct a needs analysis. This is the first step in determining the types of training needed within an organization. This will lead you to design your training and actually conduct the training with intention. Conducting training with intention is an important factor of creating successful training programs. You need to be deliberate with your training, so you give clear instruction and provide the trainees with a solid foundation of knowledge to be built on, rather than give them mixed signals or mixed messages and have to rework that kind of knowledge base later. It's also important to specify your objectives up front so you can tailor the learning experience to aim towards those objectives. You should also determine what criteria you want to measure related to performance and actually evaluate that performance. Lastly, use feedback throughout the process to get input from folks who are going to be trained and also from the stakeholders who might have seen trainings conducted at the organization before. That input is not only going to help guide you in the training process, but it'll help you build buy-in and give the end users voice on what's actually happening during the implementation. Now, I mentioned this a little before, but education in the workplace, it's complex. And as a part of our training approach at Elire, we take a perspective of delivering this information to the trainees at specific moments in time. These are moments that all of trainees who are going through change, they'll come across at some point. This might seem intuitive, but I find it very useful to lay out these moments of need to help understand the theory behind when we need to provide the actual training. So the first moment of need is when someone needs to learn something new. So as an example, say a new system is being installed and an employee is no longer going to use PeopleSoft. That's probably something that managers and end users need to to know, and they can learn this in various ways, whether it's through email, training invitations, departmental meetings. The method of that communication can be detailed out in the communication matrix or the communication plan, but it's important, it's an important moment in training. When somebody needs to learn something new, it's important to deliver that information at the right time. So next, after some time has passed, the trainee has learned that there's going to be some sort of change that they'll need to learn about. That's when we approach the second moment of need. And this is the moment in which the trainee needs to learn more about the change. They need to expand their knowledge beyond what was initially taught to them. This is the point in really when traditional training takes place. Maybe it's an e-learning, maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's a instructor-led training. It's the second moment of need is when you expand your knowledge beyond the core concepts. The third moment of need comes following the actual training, and this is when the trainee or the end user needs to apply what they learned in the safe classroom environment to a real world scenario. When they're applying this, we need to be ready with some form of support to help the trainee apply what they learned. And oftentimes this includes things like quick reference guides or job aids, and it can also arrive in the form of change champions and peer support. But things still will go wrong, and if something goes wrong, the trainee needs support to help them through that problem solving. The fourth moment of need is when things go wrong. We want to be sure that there's some sort of support, usually in the form of a help desk or a change champion, a project team. We just want to make sure there's support to help the trainee go through the problem solving process. And then lastly, the trainee might learn the new process, become comfortable with the system, but there might be changes down the line. And those changes could be 6 months after go live, or even 6 years after go live. It's important to have a plan in place so that when things do change, the end users know how to react and how to adapt to that change. So now that we understand the moments of need for training, we can start determining the needs of an organization. So a needs assessment determines the organizational factors that facilitate or inhibit the training effectiveness. I've gathered this information in the past by conducting what we call listening tours. And this is where we interview end users, project team members, stakeholders, and pretty much other key implementation players to determine what's gone right in the past, what's gone wrong in the past, and what might work well for this specific project and moving forward in the future. These listening tours are very revealing. And another way to gather information is to survey the employees. I've seen this work wonders because it gives you quantitative data to analyze and evaluate, and leadership loves hard numbers. So it's great to be able to survey your population and go to a stakeholder with a hard statistic like 75% of your employees are excited for the new system, or whatever the case may be. So next, during the needs assessment, your team needs to identify the end users, or like what tasks the end users are going to be responsible for in the future, and which of those tasks are changing as a result of the implementation. This can be kind of a daunting ask, but you can leverage the listening tour. You can observe current state sessions and future state design sessions, different design documentation, and existing task inventories to kind of help you come up with all of the different tasks that the employees will need to be trained on. I find it's easiest to start by outlining high-level processes and then just drilling down to get more detailed from there. And then comes the fun part, and that's when you determine exactly how employees are going to be trained. So you need to consider factors such as the population being trained, like the size of the population, how big of an impact you expect the change to have, And it's at this point you also determine which employees need training in which areas. So essentially what you're trying to do is determine the training track that each employee or each group of employees will need to follow, so you can plan to have the right content created for them going down each of those individualized tracks. And as a result, all of this information can be gathered and put together in a training matrix, which the training matrix is the primary outcome of the needs assessment. It shows the recommended training modality by process, by population, by moment of need, and it can also be used to manage the design, the development, and the delivery of the training materials. So at this point in the training, with that training matrix, we have everything laid out and ready to go. And like it says on this slide, effective training takes all of this information we've gathered in the needs assessment and it transforms it into training content. But as good as your training content might be, there are some factors that can influence the effectiveness of your training. And these factors include things like poor attitudes, the organizational culture, and the readiness of the business to get to the goal line. So I say poor attitudes because it's human nature for people to resist change. If you find trainees that are very excited for the change, you want to really highlight those employees and bring them on as change champions, because it is great to have end users and change champions with really positive attitudes. But what you're trying to do is combat the human nature for people to resist change, because it can snowball and create this self-fulfilling prophecy where people think, well, this implementation is going to be a cluster of chaos, so I don't want to put a lot of effort into it, and then it's going to be crazy, and then comes the go live, things get crazy. So some ways to engage people are to, like I said, bring them on as change champions and get them excited for the change by highlighting the positive aspects of the change and really reinforcing the benefits that the change is going to have once they've gone through the training. So some other ways to engage folks are simple things like, holding office hours for folks to air their worries and address them. You can also deliver exciting messages to them in multiple ways, such as through animated videos or town hall meetings, and just doing little or writing fun communications to go out to everybody to keep them engaged and make it so they're very excited about the actual training. Other factors that influence training include a culture that doesn't necessarily hold trainees accountable. So during a listening tour, I learned one of my clients didn't require any sort of assessment or evaluation during their previous implementations, which guided me to really push for small knowledge checks on through the project I was assigned to hold the trainees accountable. The knowledge checks were, like I said, they were small. They weren't anything that would really discourage the trainees, but it did help keep them engaged, and we were able to track the knowledge checks and make sure that everybody went through that and be able to successfully get the entire training population to actually complete the training. And lastly, the readiness of trainees can impact the success of training. That seems pretty self-explanatory, but if trainees are taught something too early, or if you miss one of those moments of need and you don't inform the trainees that change is coming, or you don't support them when they need to go through that initial problem solving phase, the trainee will spend time trying to catch up rather than moving forward, and it can really discourage them. But we can combat these issues in a number of ways. One is by ensuring that the training materials simulate the job experience so that trainees can take the information that they learned and actually apply it to their jobs. By effectively simulating the job experience, it removes that kind of nebulous theory to real world application, which is incredibly helpful with training. Another way to combat these kind of different issues is by creating an organizational climate that values the acquisition of knowledge and skills. So it can be done in casual ways by, publicly congratulating employees for finishing their training, giving them some sort of award, or if you can, some sort of bonus for going through the trainings. But simply put, organizations that prioritize overcoming these training obstacles, they have success with their trainings, which in turn reduces the transition pain points of an implementation. So let's move on to training, the actual training delivery. This is moment of need number 2. So Elire typically owns the train the trainer portion of an implementation, and then those trained trainers will go on to train trainees. How's that for a tongue twister? The client's trainers will typically own end user delivery and set up training in the classroom setting. But with Elire's help, this can go more smoothly because of the upfront work that is put into the training strategy and the documentation from the training matrix at the beginning of the project, because it really sets a solid foundation for those trainers to build on when training comes. And like I said before, the training strategy outlines all the tasks that need to be trained, the modality in which they will be delivered, whether that's through a classroom course or self-directed learning programs. And it'll also outline, if there's enough commitment to it, training environments that end users can use to simulate their on-the-job tasks without messing up production or a development type environment. So one trend I found here is that the skills of a trainer and the instructional designer are key to an effective delivery. And what I've seen is that poor trainers tend to be people who don't understand the material that they're training themselves, which can very quickly derail a project because the trainers are essentially that intermediary voice between the project team and the employees who are actually going to be using the system that the project team is setting up. So I can't stress enough that if you want a smooth implementation, you should push to invest in quality trainers and instructional designers, as well as consultants to help train those trainers and keep them informed through the design of the system. One issue I've seen is that project teams will bring the trainers on too late, and that can be a large issue because when the trainers don't have a thorough understanding of where the system was and where the system will be in the future, they can't provide as good of training compared to when they have that extensive knowledge of the entire process of the implementation, and they have that in-depth knowledge of the system that they're training. So obstacles come up in every implementation, and listed here are training obstacles I've run into over and over again, and I'll discuss what I found helps to overcome each one, starting with a lack of in-person training. This is a newer obstacle thanks to the pandemic, but it's a hot topic in the training community today. Remote training became extremely popular when COVID hit, and everyone was on board and excited about this remote training, but it was really, they were only excited about it out of necessity. The desire for in-person training came back quickly, and it's only getting stronger. And I think this is because remote training is hard for trainers, and it's also hard for trainees. Oftentimes the trainers don't get engaged learners, and the trainees feel like they don't have enough hands-on training. But remote training can be done effectively. And the key to it, I find, is to have virtual instructor-led training balanced with self-guided e-learnings. So what I've seen happen is organizations will lean too heavily on the self-guided remote learning and not enough focus is put onto those virtual instructor-led training courses. Having a person actually train in front of a webcam, it better simulates the classroom compared to e-learnings, and it can really help with those complex system changes or process changes that are occurring. That being said, there is a benefit to having those self-guided courses, especially for more simple processes. Next, I've seen resistance from the workforce time and time again. Like I said before, people naturally resist change and they don't want to spend the time going through the training because it means they have to put forth effort into learning something new. And it's unfortunate, but it's a very common obstacle and one that's hard to combat because you're basically tasked at changing the nature and the minds of an entire workforce. So what I found helps ease the resistance from the workforce is sticking to the change management framework. Develop a change strategy, communicate deliberately and effectively, engage stakeholders, determine the impact of the change, and ensure that your business is ready for training. And when the training actually comes, if you've followed this core framework, you've communicated, you've engaged throughout, you've stuck to the strategy, your resistance to the change will be less. Another easier obstacle I've seen is training availability and accessibility. So in the past, I've seen just not enough planning go into the availability. At one client I saw, we were supposed to train employees on how to use the computer to log their time when they'd been doing it on paper, but they didn't designate computers for those folks to actually practice with. So the way to combat this obstacle is to call out these roadblocks early on in the implementation, gather support from the stakeholders and the top leadership, and just don't let training become an afterthought. Another issue I've seen come up is that trainees feel there's too much information presented to them at once without enough time for them to absorb it. And this goes into our moments of need training. So it's important to deliver the knowledge at multiple points, and that repetition and hitting the training delivery at the right time really does help knowledge stick. And it's important to plan for that early on because when you're designing the curriculums, designing the content, making sure that you're ready to actually deliver those the training at the right moments of need will go a long way. And lastly, something I've seen happen time and time again is that there's no plan for an ongoing support system. You know, customers are investing huge amounts of money into an implementation. They can get their training right, but if they don't keep a flexible mindset and think forward to when go live is over, they can run into issues. And this is why we at Elire develop an evergreen strategy to ensure that when the project is finished, the training continues and stays current, because training, it doesn't end at go live. It continues throughout the life of the system whenever, and it shows up whenever a new employee is brought on board or a change is made to the system. So that kind of sums up the major 5 issues I've personally seen with training during implementations. And I want to bring your attention back to the first one here, the lack of in-person training. So like I said before, I firmly believe that training remotely can be successful if you strike that balance between virtual instructor-led sessions for complicated processes and self-guided courses for simpler processes. But I'd like to add to this and say that I've seen some pretty lackluster self-guided courses, some of which are simply Word documents with like paragraphs of instructions and a couple screenshots intended to be entire training courses. So if you've come across something like that, I'd like to show you a tool I've used to easily create a more engaging self-guided training. And that tool is called Articulate Rise. So Rise is a great program that offers features you'd expect in any e-learning, like graphs, charts, images, videos, file attachments, all sorts of stuff. And it also includes a set of interactive components that can really engage trainees a little further. And it can help the trainees just feel like they're not reading a bunch of pieces of text for a training, which can bore them endlessly and disengage them. So back to my example, when there was a Word document that was intended to be an entire training, I was able to take the content of that Word document and create a more interactive web-based e-learning in under an hour, I'd say, because Rise does make it very simple to create that. And as you can see on the start, this is what an employee would see here, and they can see all the different topics that are going to be trained. And they would just simply run through the training, read any content that's there. I added video to help engage them and kind of give them a demonstration. There's different screenshots from the system. You can see it's tracking your progress on the left, so it's easy on the eye, so to speak. But I also added interactive things like interactive graphics that you can click on to get more information from the graphic, and a couple of knowledge checks that you can go through to ensure that the end users are actually paying attention to the training, and help keep them engaged. And like I had said before, this knowledge check isn't meant to be something that discourages the trainee, but just rather to check their engagement throughout the process. But like I said, all this was super simple to make using Rise, and there's plenty of other interactive ways to engage the learners. This is just one option to kind of spruce up your remote self-guided training. So that is all the time that I have today. I don't see any questions, but I'd like to thank you all for attending this webinar. And if you do have any questions, I can answer them now.